Plummer, his energy, even though he was the senior member of the room, was so bright and so light. And he surprised us.
The Theatre Curation Project was born in the spirit of stewardship over the art, craft, and history of the theatre. Its purpose is to curate these stories of our mentors and what they passed on to us to be a resource for future generations. Its goal is to preserve these stories and the lessons within them from being lost forever.
Hi folks, my name's Dwyre. I'm an actor in Toronto. I've worked across the country in regional theatres, and I've worked on television and film, both here and abroad. And I've also worked a little bit at the Stratford Festival. And I really want to contribute to this mentor series because so many of the people that I've been watching videos about from you guys have also mentored me. And it's amazing to see how our personal journeys are so different and in other ways so similar, and in how we find ways to develop bit by bit along the way as artists. And especially this week, I'm thinking back to past productions, and one in particular, as we have lost an amazing, legendary actor in Christopher Plummer at 91 years of age last week. In my first season at the Stratford Festival, I was in the young company, and we were placed in Romeo and Juliet, Love's Labour's Lost, and Caesar and Cleopatra with Christopher Plummer. And Caesar and Cleopatra was the late opener. Everything else was open, and it was rehearsing and then would be the last to open. And though the workload was super heavy, I remember being really, really excited to be around someone with the experience and the reputation and the gravitas that Christopher Plummer had. Luckily, I was chosen somehow to be one of the young company members that had a scene with Christopher Plummer in Caesar. And I was the major domo of Cleopatra's palace. And our job was to bring on an enormous feast for Caesar after one of his conquering missions, and he had returned home for some rest and repose. And my character delivered long-winded and elaborate and very enthusiastic speeches about the different kinds of delicacies and fish and exotic meats and stuffed dates and Mediterranean delights that we had for Caesar, until Caesar rolled his eyes and moved on to more important things, that being Cleopatra. And those were a few minutes on stage, but that was the festival stage with a man who had played so many amazing parts. Hamlet and Henry V, and the list goes on and on. And, you know, those few minutes, as everybody knows, those few minutes of a final product come from hours and hours of rehearsal. And that's where we got to see who Christopher Plummer was. And I'm really glad that I wasn't shy around him. For as green as I was, I chatted with him, and I remember making him laugh a few times, and some quips, and you know, I could see that sort of witty sense of humor and that impish kind of smile that he always had through what can sometimes be mundane practice, you know, at the end of a season. Plummer, his energy, even though he was the senior member of the room, was so bright and so light. And he surprised us. We often, I remember kind of waiting to see what his outfits would be. He surprised us in wearing a lot of tracksuits, like jaunty tracksuits, Lululemon equipment, you know, inspired clothing, Adidas. I remember snappy, kind of colorful sneakers that he would wear, and bandanas that started in the standard classical spot on his neck and then over time moved to different areas. He wore a bandana on his head, and then the bandana was sideways a week later, and then he brought it back and it was on his wrist, and then it was backwards on his head, and then it was on his knee. And I remember being fascinated, wondering if these were character choices that he was making, that he wanted to kind of feel something kinetically on a certain part of his body, or if it was practical, or if he just liked the color of it. But I also remember talking about sort of the accoutrement that he wore with him. I talked with Chris about them. I noticed he had these really beautiful watches, and he told me that they were hand painted by an artist friend of his, and he had different colors of them. They were watercolor faces on the watch, and he would wear them throughout the week, depending on how he felt mood-wise, which was really cool. And I also remember talking about, so classy, such a gentleman, old school gentleman. We talked about classic Jaguar automobiles, the E-Type series that I loved and my grandfather taught me to love, and Chris also loved. So those things were really awesome. But the lesson that he taught me, that I'm not sure he even knew he taught me, but he probably was fairly aware of how poignant his words were to a young actor. I had been offered a film job in Istanbul at the end of the season. It was going to be between seasons in the winter. And it was in Turkey, a place that I had always wanted to see since I was a little kid. And somehow this project fell into my lap. And it was a Turkish short story that had been adapted into a longer script. So I said yes almost immediately, once I figured out that it was a cool production to do and everything was safe. And once I got the script, I started learning it after shows. I come home at 12 o'clock at night and learn the script until 3. So it was a lot of work, and I realized the further I got into the script that the translation was going to be problematic from Turkish to English. There were some major holes, and grammatically it started getting very confusing. It looked like English, but some of it didn't have the meaning of English. So I was getting confused, and I was getting a little bit worried as the production date came closer. And one day in the green room I saw Chris, and so I took this to him, and I said to him, I think this is going to be a very difficult film shoot. And he listened to me, and then he said, in his patented opening address, "My dear boy, this is cinema. You must remember that as actors, we don't have the kind of control in cinema that we do on the stage. Film is about the story and the director, the money, and the location. Now, I've been in some real pieces of shit with god-awful text, but those pieces of shit shot in the south of France." And I laughed, of course. He said, "Bon voyage, mon ami." As in, take the job. He's still a young actor. And that helped me so much because I still continued to prepare, but I took the weight off myself. I realized that I could only do so much from being in this continent. And then when I was in the other continent, that's when I could deal with some of the fears that I had about the production. And we ended up heavily adapting the script. I was over-prepared, to be honest, and a lot of the script was changed anyways. And, this is a gentleman who had, what's he have, 85, 86, like 100 films? I think he has 88 films to his credit, and the highest quality. And he hadn't won his Oscar at that point, but everybody knows that he should have. But to have those moments, it wasn't a situation where Mr. Plummer took me under his wing and showed me the ropes of Henry V or showed me the intricacies of Hamlet. It was more about the process, and he knew so much about how to deal with, how to perform and how to get through production to production, especially when you're jumping from stage to film, which is my dream to do. And he is the icon, the pinnacle of doing that. He did it for almost 80 years, 91. And I'm so thankful for his openness and his humor, him humoring me, and his generosity. And I will never forget the opening night of Caesar and Cleopatra. We were in full Roman regalia, you know, leather and swords and helmets, but you could feel the energy and the electricity of the audience. You could feel the anticipation. You could feel that flair that he brought into the room. Because you know, from the first day, the first read to opening night, he knew what he was going to do. It was just a matter of figuring out the blocking, which is just unreal. And sometimes that would be detrimental, but with someone like Christopher Plummer, that's what you want. So I'm so thankful that he was a leader and a storyteller and just brought us all along and said to some green young actor, what do I do on this little film shoot? He took the time. So I'm filming this on Valentine's Day, and I have been thinking about theater so much the last few weeks. I miss it very much with all my heart. I hope you feel the love. This is a little dram of scotch for Caesar. Thank you, Chris. Hail, Caesar.